Chapter 116. Trapped. Summary. She's trapped. Mina's trapped and she can't get out. She needs to get out. Maybe bear trap isn't exactly accurate. Maybe Mina shouldn't be thinking about dumb things that don't matter, like what to call the curved jaws that fit around her leg in a way that shouldn't be possible. Fitted like a magician's rings that don't seem to have a way to separate until they suddenly do. Maybe clinging on to her scattered thoughts was the only thing keeping her from screaming. If Izuku's mutter spirals were any indication of how his brain worked, maybe the hazy wall of thoughts kept between her and the pain was the reason he was able to break his bones so much. Despite not being funny, she can't help the giggles that bloom in her chest. They're broken and cracked, panic jolting through her body with every contraction of her lungs. This is it. She's trapped. A sitting duck, a fish in a barrel, some other poor animal locked in an expression. She knows. She knows it won't do anything. But she still brings shaking hands to dull metal and lets acid drip down. And drip and drip and drip because nothing is happening. The metal is smooth, unblemished, when she runs a finger across the wet surface. No, 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 she cries, cutting off with a choked gasp of tears. No. Please! Her fingers curl around the jaws, just barely fitting between the short teeth. With a reckless abandon she hadn't felt since their first semester of hero training, she yanks the jaws in opposite directions with all her might. The shifting of teeth pulls at raw flesh, and after a second of straining to move the jaws more than a centimeter apart, the wet metal slips out of her grip. A choked-out scream from behind clenched teeth accompanies the metal biting back into skin, just a little left of where it was before, and one of her hands is slick with blood when she comes back to herself. There's not enough air. She can't breathe. It feels like the kiddo is parked on her chest, all while she's got nothing but one of those colorful twirly straws she had as a kid to breathe through. They're coming. They're going to be here soon, and she can't even stand up to face them. She can't tell if the rustling in the distance is real, or just her brain playing tricks. People are coming to kill her, and she can't do anything. She can't even fight back properly. Mina can't bring herself to look out into the distance, even as another sound snaps, like a branch under a distracted foot. Even as her eyes struggle to focus on the here and now, her brain is firing off in as many directions as it can, scrambling for anything that could take her away from this. But she runs into dead end after dead end. Acid-proof metal trap around her ankle, attached to a chain link of metal that doesn't even notice the beads of acid sitting on its surface, attached to somewhere deep and sturdy enough underground to tug her to a stop without budging. They're close now. She can hear the lone set of footsteps almost upon her. She can't. She doesn't want to die. She has to get home. She has to get back to her class and her aunt and see Earth again. She can't die alone on an alien planet light years away from home. She can't leave the others alone out here after everything they've been through. Movement finally tears her eyes up to the trees in front of her, and the man looming alongside them. The general stands tall, wiry frame as unnatural as the needle grin splitting his face in two. His eyes drip with hungry excitement. a wolf cornering a bunny. She can't help the snarl that overtakes her face, or the way she leans back as far away from him as she can while tethered in place. His grin only grows, taking relaxed steps forward as she strains further on the chain. Dull metal freezes her in place as she sees the gleam of their hunting knife slide out of the sheath. She follows the glint of the knife, up the long blade, and to the glint in the alien's eyes, and all she thinks as she stares at them is, "I'm gonna die." He doesn't even have to say anything. He knows. She's going to be killed right here, and she's never going to see her family again, and she's going to die here. No, she can't. She has to come back to them. She has to fight for her life, like they've been doing since the first villain stepped out of Kuragiri's warp gate that first week. Her body is coiled in on itself, energy ready to be released as soon as she wants. Subtly, she shifts one foot under her and one hand under her shirt. So despite the burning in her ankle and needle-like teeth entrapping her, she suddenly bounds forward as far as the chain will allow. He may be strong, but colliding with her would-be murderer sends him toppling to the ground, her falling right after him. The jolting movement blurs her vision, taking the scene away from her for a split second. When her eyes focus back in, it's on spindly fingers groping the grass for a knife. Without thinking, she swings her knife around, plunging it into his arm. A low, startled grunt. That's it. That's all he does before the discarded knife is finally back in his grip and he's swinging it up at her. Air is trapped in her lungs, and she looks at the knife pointed up at her chest, only held back by her own bloodied, shaking hands, locked on his wrists. It's so hard. He's pushing so hard, inching the knife closer. Even with her on top, gravity on her side to push the knife down and away from her. It's getting closer. The general smirks as the knife inches left and up, resting on top of her heart. She wants to let acid pool in her hands and run down to bubble his skin and get him away. But the slightest loss of grip, even just for a second, and the knife will be too deep in her chest to matter. The knife is inches from a killing blow. He's leaning up in her space now, with a satisfied grin. She can't use her quirk. Mina does the only thing she can think of. The alien screams when teeth sink into their arm. Their arm not clenched between her teeth, lets go of the knife on instinct, slipping out of her left hand's grip to try and pry her off his flesh. But loosening grip in one hand means that suddenly there's a lot less force opposing the knife in one direction. The knife twists down and plunges into the alien's chest. It's a horrible sound, the strangled gasp that sputters from his mouth. Arms suddenly freeze, and his eyes meet hers as he takes shaky breaths that thunder in the suddenly deafeningly quiet forest. And she just sits there, breath after breath, staring wide-eyed, until he doesn't take another breath. Mina can't look away. Everything is muffled, like she's been dropped into a world of thick, smothering cotton. All she can look at is the new color on her hands. Not pink like her skin, not red like her own blood, but a shimmering opal. The same one that spills from around the knife and pools on the ground around the person she just shouts in the distance. She's brought back to the moment, back into her weary body, with a sharp jolt. She doesn't have time for this. She has to run. She has to escape and get back to her family. She didn't do that to die right after. So she lays her hands on the trap once again, and acid pools in her hands. So the metal won't melt under her acid. She'll make it. Seeking out the burning in her veins, the hint of acid in her blood, she pulls for more. The acid gurgles from her hands unnaturally. It's not enough. More. She demands more. Gray metal dulls flatter under her fingers. She needs to live for her family. Her skin starts to tingle, the tingle quickly growing to a burning sensation. Where the acid drips in fresh wounds, it burns. But then, there's a change in the metal. A little divot and a bubble rising to the top of the acid. Then another, before the metal is breaking apart, dissolving away into nothing. Acid falls further into her wounds, following the metal embedded into her as it eats away and flushes it out. But it burns. Fuck, it burns. But as she stops the flow of acid from her now red hands, the pain quickly fades back under adrenaline's haze. She stumbles to her feet, mine not quite following as she runs into the underbrush, away from the growing noise of footfalls, and away from the piece of her that can no longer follow behind. Tears threaten to spill from her eyes, but she can't afford her vision to be compromised, can't afford to miss something again as her exposed feet push forward around soft grass and rough roots. Her brain quiets and gets louder at the same time as faraway voices cry out in shock. The guilt and horror at what she'd just done sinks under the layers of sound. She's not far enough. They're getting louder, voices pounding in her mind. A glimpse back gleams her nothing but shines of promised pain. Faster. She just has to push herself faster. Faster than the smell of iron clinging to her skin. Heavy and thick in the air. Heavy and thick on her skin as blood runs down her body. Yet light and slippery on her tongue. Because it's not her blood. His blood is a muted, vague sweetness on her tongue. She spits it on the ground. She lets the roaring sensations get lost in the jumble of thoughts and the overwhelming urge consuming her mind as she runs through the forest. To escape.